Hey, welcome back to Archaeology 101. Field archaeology always, but lab archaeology as well. When we look at the two, most of the work's done in the lab, the fun is out in the field. And I thought, boy, we barely touched the surface when we looked at Celts here a while back, and maybe a trailer just to finish it up might be in order. And I thought, we just kind of dabbled right in the middle of what you might find and what we might find here in Ohio. And typically in Ohio, this is probably the average size of a celt. You've got squared, you've got convex bits. But this is basically the most common material, the most common size. This one shows damage at the pole, probably broke off, they reworked it, and they continued to use it. Typical size of a celt in Ohio, typical thickness, but these can vary. Let me give you an example. This is a celt made of slate, extremely thin. Now we know that this is not going to tolerate any prying or lifting or bending, so this is kind of a slicing kind of celt. And to move on past just a thin celt are the little tiny celts that we occasionally find. This one is made from hematite, very, very heavy iron-based stone. My experience is very few of these are found in Richland County, Mansfield area. A few more are found in Coshocton. Get down on the Ohio River, and a lot of it is found. But again, these are small celts, and this is a little tiny celt. And for the longest time, I heard scholars in Ohio say, well, these were for little tiny kids, small tools for small kids. And I would always say, but what about small tools for small adults, like midgets or dwarfs? And so the word of caution here is when you talk among your friends, when you listen to academics, and when you read, is don't get stuck in a corner. Don't think of a red wagon when you go into it, or you'll be looking at that doggone wagon all day long. It's like listening to a song you don't want to hear, and you're still singing it 3 days later. Keep an open mind. I just remember this guy was so convinced, and he is such a good archaeologist. Small tool, small child. And I argued with him, and I said, look, if they were using these with small kids, they had all kinds of small kids, every culture for thousands of years. Why are these so rarely found? How about this? Small tool for really small people, like a dwarf or a midget. And fewer of those, but yet they were in the culture and they would need smaller tools. So here we go. It's an ongoing argument, and sad to say in Ohio, it's still being argued. So I'm going to plead innocent to a thing that's called Occam's razor. And if you don't know what that is, it's an economic principle, and it says, all things said and done, both arguments at a stalemate, usually the most simplistic and easiest answer is right. So I'm just going to plead the fifth and throw Occam's razor out there to all you folks. I want to add to this that celts can be extraordinarily large. You'll see them in museums. You'll see them in other people's collection. This is big. This is typical right here. But this is huge. And it just came off a typical campsite, a well-used campsite in my field walking area. What's unusual about this is the bit. And if you look at it, you can see that it was never perhaps ever finished, or it was used and put back into this condition. But nevertheless, you might call it a blunt. I don't like to use that word because it implies too many connotations that are not correct, but just a dull end that's maybe it is, maybe it isn't completed. And the whole concept of this celt with a broken pole still being reused, this has been repolished, reused. Here's one of these celts that snapped and broke, or they just used it and used it and used it and used it, and it got littler and littler, and finally we had this little tiny celt, and it looks like it ended up being a hammerstone. They were truly opportunists. They used what they had, and they used it when they needed it. So coming to today's presentation, I did a little outside reading, and I was reading specifically from this journal, a group north of us up toward Lake Erie. Their group or their chapter of our state organization put out volumes. They're doing digs constantly, and they are well versed with good academic overseeing. And in here, they took a look at some celts. The 5 years they worked on the Met site, they had 19 celts come up, and they had them chemically analyzed, and they found a couple variances going on here. Some had the fats, the proteins that led toward bear meat, bear fat, and some of them leaned the other way toward the resin from conifers and the fats from roots and tubers. So look here, we get thinking maybe just a stone tool used for bark removal or for chopping, and now we're seeing with more sophisticated scientific work that these things may have been a kitchen tool. So there you are. Don't let that red wagon get in the way, or you're going to think these were ungrooved axes. And I just present to you the idea from many people that it's a multi-purpose tool. It was made with one thing in mind, but they certainly could use it for other things and did. Over here is one of many ways that people put their collections together. They want to move it around, show it, take it to meetings, classes, and just get people thinking. This was just a really a fun little frame that I threw together to bring it into some of my classes to get people thinking that there's more out in the field than just stones and rocks. And so we have a good array of celts, and I might add that you get variations of a celt that we call a chisel or an adze. But anyway, there's quite a variety of these. And then we get into these concretions, paint bowls, finger bowls, many different names. And we have some thoughts on that. And we're going to pursue that later with another time with you folks. And take a look at the paint bowls that are popping up here in Ohio, or the finger bowls, and some of the possible uses. And of course, then there's some broken slate that come off of some of these same sites that the celts are coming from, and even little abraders that were made out of concretion. So just to whet your appetite, kind of wrapping up the tail end of celts and getting ready to move on to another thing with the paint pots. And then as we sort of close up today, I want to thank you for your questions. Thank you for following us. I want to continue to remind you that Commissioner Tom is doing great things. Check out Tom and his buddies. And then I want to toss another direction that we're going to be headed over here. And this direction pretty much are what we call cores. And interestingly enough, it appears that every culture used cores. In Ohio, we always think about the Hopewell cores and the Flint Ridge cores. And that's where most people's heads are. But if we go down this direction, you're going to see that there were cores that predated the Hopewell and the Adena. Down here we have paleo cores, and we have archaic cores, and cores that were designed just to take little flake knives off of. But we're going to follow that up on a later date. So I hate to let go of you, but I enjoyed my time with you, and I appreciate you joining us today. So long from Field Archaeology.